have it. Can I do it for $100?
Okay.
I can just give you. Oh,
Sorry. You're fine, you're fine. We're very casual at these Lubbock Liberty events, and so we try to make it very comfortable and to where we feel good to discuss things. And so we usually have a workshop that goes on about once a month. I think we skip the summer months, but this has been going on since March of 2013, right? Yes. March of 2013, we've been having the workshop speaker series. And Lubbock Liberty is just a group of people. If you don't know us, it's a group of people that were all originally part of the Republican Party that thought that we needed to start discussing some things that really affect how much liberty we have in this country. And being in this country, being American, that's the utmost important thing that we can think about is our liberty. And so we decided that we were going to have these events to where we could have these discussions. Now, you'll have to excuse me, I twisted my ankle a little bit earlier. I was rushing to get over here, and so I've been working quite a bit lately, but we've got to make these events happen. We have to meet together as much as possible, not only in just Lubbock Liberty events, but lots of other events, and I know a lot of you are very involved in lots of other events that pertain to protecting our liberty. Again, most important thing. Today, we have, just before I introduce Dr. Robert Tidwell as our speaker today, I did want to let you know that if you'd like to see some of our previous workshops, you can go to LubbockLiberty.com. That's just it, www.lubbockliberty.com, and go and watch any of the events that we put on in the past. We've had speakers like Dr. Benjamin Powell, the director of the Free Market Institute at Texas Tech University, and we've had Michael Ward in here to talk about her involvement in city politics and all of the different things that we have to face locally, because that is very important too, is that we deal with local government. But we've had other speakers as well that have come in, Dr. Donald May, Professor Arnold Lowy from the law department, and I guess everybody knows Dr. Donald May. He ran for U.S. Congress this past election season. So, there's a lot of things that we try to cover, and it is difficult to get to everything that's important to our liberty. But today, we have a discussion on progressivism, so progressive politics, and how that has affected the scope of our government, how that has grown our government to completely outrageous proportions. And Dr. Robert Tidwell, it is doctor, correct? Dr. Robert Tidwell is here today. He's a local historian. He had his undergraduate degree in political science. His focus was the Soviet and post-Soviet Russia, Cold War, and Asia. His doctorate is in history with an emphasis on contemporary U.S. military history and diplomacy. As a guy who grew up during the Cold War, he's long had an interest in the Soviet Union and similar totalitarian regimes, namely how they established and consolidated power in their respective societies. Thank you all for coming again. I'm so glad that we have quite a few people here. Our events are usually pretty small.
I know, I'm sorry for walking in front of you.
Oh, y'all are just fine,
Sorry.
I was just saying earlier that we're very casual at these workshops, and so feel free to walk by if you need to, in and out of the restroom, and I'm sure that there will be wait staff that comes in here to try to get you drinks, and so we welcome that, absolutely. And hopefully you won't be put off by that. All right. So, Dr. Robert Tidwell, during his university years, he spent a great deal studying various progressive groups and organizations, especially with respect to their associations with the Soviet Union and other statist movements. Frankly, a whole session can be devoted to this fascism alone. And I think that you'll find that it's very relevant to our times, hearing the history of this, and then comparing it to some of the things that we face today. So, I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Tidwell.
Okay, no lecterns, so I've got to go freestyle. Okay, everybody can hear me, right? Okay, good. Okay, if I were to say the word progressivism to you, what comes to mind? What do you immediately think?
Liberal, globalist.
Okay, there's that.
Statist.
Absolutely. Anything else?
Very liberal.
Beg pardon?
Very liberal.
Well, yeah, probably in the,
Not in
in the
classic
American,
sense.
yeah, in the contemporary American sense, yes. So, progressivism as we know it and as we understand it today.
Please, David, I need to several up front, please.
That's the casual part.
Hopefully David heard that. That's what I'm. Well, progressivism as we know it, it's not a recent phenomenon. It's not something that just appeared in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We're looking at a movement that really has roots going back, well, not even to the early part of the last century, but actually into the latter part of the 19th century. And if you want to get really, really, really technical, you can take it all the way back to the period just after the French Revolution or even Plato's Republic. So at least that's where the inspiration could be derived. But progressivism as a movement really got its start in the late 19th century. And in the American context, it started out as kind of a response, if you will, to some of the problems and issues that arose in some of America's largest cities like New York and Chicago. Problems like overcrowding, slums, poor sanitation. And the way that it started was really more of a local and community response to these issues. Some of the earliest progressive reformers didn't have in mind bringing the totality of the federal government in to address these problems. Many of the solutions would be something that I think a lot of us in here would applaud. I mean, people who were some of the community elites, as you were, the movers, the shakers, that people had connections to money, who were getting other people to pay attention to these problems and trying to find local, community-based solutions to address these problems. Then it started to change. There started to be a morphing of this idea of developing a more individual, community-focused response to one that decided to call upon the vast powers of the state to address these issues. Some of the early progressive reformers were informed by their Christian faith and religion. They saw it getting involved in the community as basically their call to help people who were less fortunate than themselves in their community. However, the progressive movement was fairly quickly taken over by people who had motives that were not necessarily informed by Judeo-Christian philosophy, but instead by one that saw the state as your faith. Basically the rise of what some people have called the God state. So basically they took the whole concept of you being informed by your religious convictions to personally give of yourself, your time, your effort, your energy, your money to help those less fortunate, and then transfer all of that effort and energy into a bureaucracy, into basically new ministers of the new faith. The new faith being the state. And the priests and ministers would be your politicians, your bureaucrats, heads of bureaucracies. Whole new bureaucracies would be your churches and cathedrals to take care of society's ills. Some of the people who really glommed onto this were people who were kind of the sons and daughters of some of the well-heeled people in this country. Their parents were able to afford to send them off to places like Europe to attain higher education. Go to college in London. Go to college in Berlin. Well, a lot of these kids ended up being exposed to some fairly radical ideas, not just Marxism, but even radical Marxism, or various shades of Marxism. The reason why I say there are various shades of Marxism, because even Marx himself would not necessarily be a doctrinaire Marxist. There was a book a few years ago that was titled Marx Against Marxism. Now, the title kind of throws you off and said, what? He basically discounted his whole ideas? No. The argument in the book was that the end goal is the issue. That revolution, however you get to the revolution, doesn't really matter as long as the end goal is achieved. Well, there are a lot of people in the late 19th century who had that idea. There were some who were the radical egalitarians who really bought into Marx's idea of, yeah, no families, break the family, let the state raise the children, and everyone basically belongs to everyone else. And that would eventually lead to some of the free love movements of the late 19th century. I gotta tell you, the hippies were basically Johnny and Jane come-latelys. Everything that they thought that they had created and developed, it was all old hat. You get to the futurists in Italy in the early 1900s, they had long stringy hair, they were wearing weird clothes, reading really bad poetry, and devising dreams to completely and totally reshape society. So they were already tuning in and dropping out in the early 1900s. But some of the people in the United States who really liked these ideas that were coming from Europe, especially places like Prussia. Prussia had a fairly long tradition, especially under guys like Bismarck, of having a very strong central government that was basically steering and guiding all of society. And there were guys like John Dewey who thought, this is a really great idea. You can completely and totally reshape society. You can govern all of humanity this way. And he took many of these ideas and put them into his ideas that later became basis for contemporary American education. Some of the things that he believed were that basically your children don't have any thoughts, feelings, or emotions or impulses of their own. They don't own those. Their thoughts, their feelings, and their impulses are basically of the community. Let that sink in for a minute. You are not yourself, you are everyone. So, then there were others. John Dewey was not alone. He's just one of the more well-known names that came out of this impulse. And eventually, you had progressives who really liked some of the ideas that were coming out of Europe. Like I said, they were exposed to them. And they brought these ideas back to the United States, where there are already these connections between progressives in the United States and some of the more radical leftists in Europe. And the left in Europe became really interesting about the time of the First World War, and fairly shortly thereafter. In the very early 1900s, there was this guy in Italy, for example, who was doctrinaire Marxist. I mean, he was a true believer. But he had a bit of a change of heart with classical Marxism. Classical Marxism discusses the international proletariat. The idea of the workers all around the world are inherently dissatisfied with their lot in life, and basically will just take a spark to set off the revolution, and you can completely and totally change society. Well, this particular gentleman looked at that and said, well, I really dig where Marx is going, but how he thinks things are going to get there, that's BS. There is no such thing as an international proletariat. There's no international history, culture, society. That really what you need to do is get that socialism down to the national level. National socialism. This is going to sound really familiar. Well, the idea was that in order to have a revolution within a country, you had to appeal to and base your revolution on that country's social society, culture, history, ideas. Again, many roads lead to Brother Marx. So this gentleman also had this idea of, instead of just completely and totally smashing the capitalist system, let's fuse the state and private enterprise to the point that you really can't tell where one begins and the other ends. Now, of course, the state will be on top, guiding everything, but the two are so fused, you really cannot tell where one ends and one begins. To the point where the state can actually tell you as a small business owner, these will be your hours of operation, these will be the days that you operate, this will be the price that you charge for your goods. Wage and price controls, sounds familiar. But anyway, any guesses as to who this particular gentleman was?
Mussolini.
You got it. Benito Mussolini, guy who used to be the editor of the most radical newspaper outside of Moscow, and actually had a shout out in Pravda. Lenin said, hey, you're doing a good job over there in Italy. Keep up the good work. And even whenever Mussolini created his theory of fascism or corporatism, and people mistake that and think, well, he was in bed with corporations. No. Corporatism, meaning basically all of society together in one corporate body. whenever he developed fascism, you'd think, oh, that was instantly going to be a break with the Soviet Union. No, actually, the Soviet Union said, you know, I think that you found a perfect segue from late-stage capitalism to early socialism. You found a bridge, brother. Bring it on. You're going to help further the revolution. There really wasn't a break with the fascists and the doctrinaire communists in Moscow until a little fracas in 1941 when Hitler decided to invade Russia. Up to that point, the Soviet Union and the fascists were actually on fairly decent terms. Sure, the fascist movement had created their counter to the Communist International. They created the anti-Comintern. But in terms of their end goals, they were the same. When Mussolini developed his philosophy of fascism, there were some within the Italian Communist Party who said, you have strayed from the true faith, my brother. And he said to them, no. The end nirvana is the same. The thing that we are both aiming to achieve is the same. I'm just going a little different path. I'm just taking a slight deviation to get there, but trust me, I'm just as down with the struggle as you are. But there are other people who bought into Mussolini's ideas. Most of us in here, whenever we think of fascists, especially in Europe, we think really it's just Germany and Italy. That was it. The fascist idea appealed to a lot of people in Europe. There were a lot of fascist movements in Europe. There were fascist movements in France. Yes, France had a fascist movement. In between, making some very fine cheeses and occasionally, getting loaded on wine, they developed a fascist movement of their own. There were fascist movements in Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Greece, you name it. There was even an attempt at a fascist movement in Britain. It didn't really go over so well. They were basically chased out of town for the most part. The English thought that it was very, very distasteful, some of their ideas. But where it really found foothold were in the countries of Italy and Germany. Now in Germany, the fascist movement there was a fusion, really, of two political parties. On the one hand, you had the National Socialists. They were informed by the ideas of Mussolini. On the other hand, you had the German Workers' Party. There was this kind of down and out corporal wannabe artist who came into the scene and was very instrumental in joining these two parties together to form the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, or most people just call them the Nazis. And so I'm sure that probably some of you are thinking, wait a second, these guys all have these left-wing ideas. How on earth do we get to calling the Nazis right-wing? Well, who gave them that label? Who called them right-wingers? The Soviet Union. Basically, anyone just slightly to the right of Stalin was considered right-wing. And really, that whole right-wing accusation came after basically Hitler and Stalin went their separate ways. Well, more along the lines of Hitler trying to take what Stalin had. So it was really at that point that the Soviet Union and the fascists called it splits. Now, this whole dynamic was actually playing out right over here in the United States. In the early 1900s, the Communist Party of the United States is founded in Chicago, Illinois. And from its very beginning, it was pretty much steered and organized by the Communist International and the Soviet Union. And the Comintern was created as a means for the various state central committees to kind of steer and guide revolutionary movements throughout the world. It was basically their clearinghouse to establish contacts and help revolutionary groups and movements around the world. Well, the Comintern had an immediate connection with the American Communist Party. And you can see how communist attitudes towards the fascists shifted and changed all the way up into World War I. Prior to the United States entering World War I, the official line of the Communist Party of the United States was, hey, don't hassle Italy and Germany. These guys are okay. Whatever's going on in Europe, it's no big deal. Then whenever the Nazis basically violated the Molotov-von Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviet Union said, oh, well, now we're at war with these guys. Almost instantaneously, the Communist Party of the United States said, we must now go to war with the Nazis. prior to that, they were referring to the British as war criminals, and their fighting the Nazis was just horrible. They were standing in the way of history and so forth. And then comes the break between the Soviet Union and the Nazi Party. And so the American Communist Party had that instantaneous sea change, saying, well, now we've got to go to war with these guys who we have been telling you not to go to war with for the past few years. But that connection between the Comintern and groups within the United States was not just isolated to the Communist Party in the United States. Pretty much any radical organization in the United States founded shortly after the First World War and all the way up, actually until the fall of the Soviet Union, there were strong connections between the Soviet Union and a wide variety of groups that would call themselves progressives or liberals in the United States. And this is not just an accusation that's just thrown out there. This is supported by the opening of the Soviet archives after the fall of the Soviet Union. There was this golden period for people who were researchers and who were interested scholars, because everything was just cast wide open. The archives of the KGB, archives of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the Politburo, all of these inner workings were thrown wide open. And what many researchers found was, well, I'll be damned. The Soviet Union was actually making direct financial support to the Communist Party of the United States, which is to be expected, but there are also various trade unions that are receiving direct payouts approved by the Central Committee of the Soviet Union, saying, yeah, sure, these guys are right on board with us, sure, right, cut them a check. You know, hard currency, please. But this sort of Soviet-informed politics began to kind of take on a life of its own. As I mentioned earlier, John Dewey, who is greatly responsible for informing a lot of contemporary American pedagogy and how we form schools and how we teach children, he wasn't the only one who was involved. But his approach was, look, guys like me, I'm not into politics. Leave politics to the politicians. The way I'm going to change society is I'm going to get into some of the key points within society. Get into the schools, get into the bureaucracies, get into the churches. There, you can start making that shift below the surface in American society. And his ideas were echoed by another Italian guy by the name of Antonio Gramsci. This was a guy who was like Stalin. I mean, not like Stalin. Well, yeah, actually, yes. Who was like Mussolini, true believer. He held to the faith of the prophet Marx, and he studied at the Church of Marxism. So much so that after the collapse of the czars in Russia, he thought, hey, the utopian society is being made in Russia. I'm going to go to Russia, and I'm going to learn everything that I can. He went out there with the rose-colored glasses of idealism, thinking that the Soviets were going to create this utopia on Earth that would be the shining example for all of mankind. When he got over there, he saw Lenin's repression, torture, imprisonment, forceful relocations, murder of his political opponents, and he started to think to himself, I've got to leave Russia. This is a little crazy. So you would think that someone who had really held on to, as basically the core of his being, and seeing that the result was brutal repression, he might rethink some things. He might have a little introspection, kind of sit down and have a little talk with himself, do some yoga, something. But he didn't change or moderate his opinion at all. He said, okay, the murder, the mayhem, the terror, okay, that I can do without. But still, the end goal is revolution. How can we get to the revolution without all of the murder and the death and everything else? Well, the way you do it is you don't push people to the revolution. You kind of invite them to it. So his idea was, hey, let's do this gradually. And mirroring Dewey, he said, hey, let's get into those key positions, not necessarily at the top of government, not at the presidency, not in the Congress or what have you. Instead, let's get in at the bureaucracies. Let's get in at the churches. And the churches were actually one of his key areas of focus, because he said in his own writings, he believed that Christianity was this bulwark standing against the advance of the state. The Christian philosophy, morals, ethics, values, and beliefs were preventing the revolution, which still held with classical Marxist theory, which was basically that religion just clouds your mind from being able to realize that there was class consciousness. It removed you from being able to achieve class consciousness and see the class struggle and engage in class warfare. Well, Gramsci thought, okay, what we need to do, as we're taking in these little key positions here and there, school teachers, guy at the DMV, whatever, we need to get into the churches. We need to get into the churches and slowly shift the
Carolina,
beliefs.
line 2, Carolina.
And slowly change the philosophy of the church from one that is more interested in direct individual personal action in addressing society's ills, but instead co-opting the churches into supporting the God state. Starting to sound a little familiar? And these ideas became very, very popular, especially in the years in the 1920s and 1930s, when there were a lot of people in the United States who thought that, hey, the fascists, they're figuring things out. I mean, there were people in the United States who were admiring Mussolini. They were looking at it and saying, look at this. Look what he's done for this country of his. Why, people are out going to work. There's plenty for all. Never mind that some of that plenty was basically your 3 hots and a cot in a political prison. But hey, whatever fills your belly, I guess. But there were people who admired him so much that Mussolini was even included in song. You've heard the song, You're the Tops. The original lyrics to the song actually said, you are Mussolini. You're the tops. I mean, because there were American liberals who thought this was the way, this was the path to the ideal society. The state would be encompassed in everything and would have its fingers in everything, guiding and directing all of humanity, and all of human ills and problems would just fade away because we would have these new ministers and angels over us, the experts within the bureaucracies, who would guide our lives for us in this wonderfully effortless manner, and except for the occasional starvation, murdering, executions, forced relocations, confiscation of property. Minor little things, my brothers and sisters. We'll get to nirvana eventually. But there were still a lot of people in the United States who thought the fascists have it figured out. They figured out a third way. That's what some people actually referred to the system at one point. It's neither raw, unbridled capitalism, and it's not doctrinaire Marxism. It's a third way. It just blends everything together. But the fascists had their problems just like the Soviet Union did, because when you have an all-pervasive state that has its fingers in everything, basically everything becomes politicized to the point that your own recreation becomes political. Some of the things that American liberals really liked was the idea that the government was even involved in your recreation, because some of these fascist states actually had departments that were dedicated to you going on vacation and focused on making sure that you had the nicest vacation possible whenever you went on your state-guided, state-supported, straight-through joy trip. And the Soviet Union did the same thing. There's a whole ministry of sport and culture. Could you imagine that in the United States? You're having the Department of Sports and Culture. How would that be? And, having someone who, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to give to you the report on sports and culture in the United States, as though we have enough political departments already. Besides, could you imagine the federal government managing your vacation? Imagine the vacation you'd get. But even after the Second World War, you would think that there would be people in the United States who would rethink things and say, well, we saw where the fascists lay. We saw how that turned out. Maybe we should kind of rethink some of our political orientation here. Sadly, no. Now, there are people who said, okay, the fascists got it wrong. And the Soviets under Stalin, they kind of messed up there, with the 50-odd million people murdered and executed. It's a little hiccup there. There are these guys in China. Why? They're going to create a utopia. except for the massive starvation that again killed millions and millions and millions of people, the forced relocations and the executions, and the massive amounts of murder. But maybe there's this guy in Cuba. Yeah, he's talking about forming a whole new utopian society, except for it has the highest imprisonment rate in the entire world, as in terms of people in prison compared to the rest of the population. It's a prison island. So you had American liberals who were kind of jumping around from one messiah to the next. That this person is going to create the workable God state. This it's going to be this person over here. But these philosophies did make their way into the body politic of the United States, because there became growing numbers of people who said, well, what we need to do to solve this problem is we need a new government agency. If we have a new government agency, it is going to solve all of these problems. Okay, well, that government agency didn't solve all these problems, so we need another one over here. It's going to do basically the same job in a slightly different way, and it will solve all the problems. Well, actually, the reason why this one didn't work over here is we didn't have enough funding. We didn't have enough funding, or we didn't have the right managers. That's it. We didn't have the right funding, and we didn't have the right managers to oversee this department. And then these departments grew. And they grew because, again, there was this almost unshakable belief that if we just have the right agency with the right people and the right amount of funding, we can make all of the problems of the human condition just fade away. Granted, it means that we basically tell you when you open your business, we tell you how much you're going to charge for your goods and services, or we tell you that you can't water your backyard because that might be considered runoff, and you're going to pollute the streams and kill little puppies and kittens, and everyone will hate you. I mean, there was this almost unshakable religious kind of belief that if we just empower these agencies enough, give them enough funding, give them enough support, that everything is just going to be wonderful. We'll have flying unicorns that distribute Skittles to everyone, and there'll be fluffy bunnies and kittens, and we'll all have a grand time. But how has that worked out? Well, let's see here. We're how many trillions of dollars in debt as of now?
17.5.
Yes, that doesn't account the unfunded liabilities.
That's another 100 trillion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And part of it, the reason why we have this debt is there were some other individuals who came along during this flowering of the progressive era. Guys like John Maynard Keynes, whose basic economic philosophy was sha-la-la-la, live for today. Spend baby, spend baby, spend baby. We can just pass the bill on till tomorrow. But even Keynes would look at how much we spend in terms of government spending to our GDP, and he'd call us nuts. Because in his own reckoning, he said, any government, even in bad times, should only spend about maybe 17 to 20% of its GDP in government spending. How much of our GDP goes to government spending now? What is our debt-to-income ratio? I mean, it's something whenever a guy who his basic economic philosophy was spend baby, spend baby, spend baby, looks at you and says, you're going a little overboard there. You might want to cut back in a little the hair of the dog there. Any questions?
We're at about 1-to-1 ratio, I think, are we not?
Debt to income ratio? No, we're over that. We're beyond Germany now. We're closing in on Japan in terms of debt to income ratio. Yeah, basically, if we were to confiscate the entire gross domestic product of the United States for 1 year and put every single penny of it into paying off the debt, we still wouldn't have the debt paid off.
Robert, I always thought of a definition of progressivism as the slippery slope or the incrementalism, one step at a time. Would that be a pretty good assessment?
Well, yeah, because that's exactly what guys like Antonio Gramsci had in mind was this gradual approach that you could lure people to socialism instead of breaking down the door and pushing them towards Marxism. You could basically lure them. Spend a little bit more money in public spending to kind of entice people. Say, look, come on in. The water's fine. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. See, doesn't it feel nice on your toes? That water's nice and warm. It kind of laps up against your ankles. Come on, a little bit more. Just a little bit more. Oh, the water's over your head. Oh, well, you, come on in. The water's fine.
I have an example of bad poetry from the hippies.
There's a lot of that, so I'll bite.
They say our love won't pay the rent. Before it's earned, our money's often spent. No.
So what would you call the system that we have now here in the United States? Because I look around and it just seems like we have a fascist society. It seems like
Technically, yes. If you really wanted to get down to the nuts and bolts of it and look at what Mussolini was proposing and what he had in mind and what other fascist movements had in mind, if we're not there, we are whistling on our way down the road.
Well, you were talking about how would you like the government to regulate your vacation or be in charge of your vacation, and it almost seems like that because, you know, there's nothing you can think about, and I think Judge Napolitano, whenever he was here last week, made a mention of this, that you can't think of anything that the government doesn't have their hands in. I mean, if I'm planning a vacation, I have to think about regulations. I have to think about the speed in which I'm going to my destination. I have to think about, you know, I mean, there are so many laws and rules that are regulated by the government. So it does seem like we live in a society like that.
Very much so, yes.
You were talking about Dewey in the schools. Now granted, my son's almost 21, so I mean, I'd like to think that my son can think for himself. But like in Chicago, for instance, and we lived in the suburbs, but in Chicago, there were schools that forbade the parents from sending packed lunches with them, saying, well, you might not have the right nutrients, you might not have this, you might not have it. When I was a kid, it was, you know, well, they kind of expect that the kids are going to eat the Twinkie and throw out the carrots, you know, they'll
It's human nature.
You know, they're kids, that's what they do, and, you know, there's the parents' responsibility. Now it's like, no, we don't trust you to do the right thing. Or look at what the crap that's passing out for school lunches now. Have you seen, I mean, when I was a high school distance runner, it would not have cut it. We wouldn't have been able to do it. And yet the state has basically said, no, we know. Parents, you know nothing. We know. And so as far as education is concerned, definitely it's moved down that way.
Well, here's something else getting on to education. Both Gramsci and Dewey had complementary ideas with regard to reforming society, completely reshaping and changing society through education. Dewey had this idea of experimentalism. Constantly play with the students in terms of how you teach them, how you impart information to them. You're always finding doing this, doing that, doing the other thing. There's really no real consistency to the method by which students learn how to read, write, do basic math, and so forth. But basically use the kids as the classroom and the children in it as your laboratory, and they are your guinea pigs. Instead of finding ways to teach children and connect with them as individuals, they're your experiment. Experiment with them. Figure, just change this way, change the way that you teach math to them, change the way that they learn language. One of the experiments that came out within the last 30 years ago was this idea of whole language. Instead of learning to read phonetically, like basically everyone in a country with an alphabet has learned how to read, individual words have sound, they have meaning to them. Well, whole language basically taught that no, you do, like the word word. You don't learn W-O-R-D, you just memorize this pattern. and that pattern is the word word. And try to memorize basically the shape of the letters and everything, not what their phonetic meaning is. Well, whole language works great if you have a system that's not based on an alphabet. If your writing system is like what the Chinese have, it's a pictographic system. Of course you're going to have to memorize what the symbol is because it doesn't necessarily have a phonetic meaning to it. And so you ended up with kids who are quote-unquote learning to read by whole language, but whenever they came across words they'd never seen before, they couldn't read them because they didn't know that the letter W meant whoa, O meant O. They actually couldn't form the sounds in their mind because they hadn't learned what the individual letters were supposed to represent. And so whole language then eventually kind of went away. There are people who try to bring it back now and again. But Gramsci, his idea was that another way to advance socialism and kind of lure people into it is if you can basically do away with their basic critical thinking skills. if you could reduce the standards for education, reduce what is expected of children, so that basically they had enough education to be good little wards of the state, good little worker bees for the government.
But did progressivism, the word originally was not synonymous with Marxism?
No. When it first started, there were a lot of people who may have called themselves progressives, who if you called them Marxists, they would be aghast. To them, progressive meant, okay, there's some rough edges in our market system. Let's kind of polish off those little rough edges, and we can make the whole capitalist system, the whole market system nice and shiny. We're just going to do some polishing here and there. Because what their original impulse was like in cities like New York and Chicago, they looked around and they said, gosh, there are these horrible, squalid slums. Somebody's got to do something. Well, the first wave of progressives, they felt that somebody, it's us. We live near this community. We have got to do something. Let's put some of our time, our effort, and our energy into fixing these problems. Some of the early progressives in New York, for example, they figured one of the problems that the poor, and especially in some of these slums, had was that they didn't really have, there was no bank for them. There was no place for them to put what little money they had into some kind of a savings account or put them into financial instruments that could benefit them. So some of the early progressives, they got some of the rich friends together and they said, hey, let's get some money together, let's capitalize and finance a bank and create a community bank so that some of these poor people can help get themselves out of poverty if we just kind of give to them a foundation within their own community. Well, these personal, individual approaches basically were swept aside whenever the statists came in and said, no. That whole individualism thingy, no. Who are you? You're not an expert. You're not an expert. We need to have experts who will have oversight over these things, and they will do a much better job than you who actually live in the community. Yes.
Returning momentarily to education, how does the Common Core curriculum fit into this progressive?
Dewey would love it. It's experimentalism. This whole idea of kind of shifting and changing the ways that you impart information, the way that you teach children, and largely taking a lot of the power out of the hands of the individual teachers and creating for them a sort of a shifting sand of methods to give information to the students. We've seen some of these math problems where they take simple addition and turn it into 5-6 steps just to add 12 to 8. when it wasn't all that long ago when I was in school, we were just taught, okay, you have the 12, so you have the 8 here, you have the 2 to the 8, okay, and then you carry the 1, and there you go, you're done. But now we have some of these Common Core math problems where you're looking at it and saying, are you trying to teach them particle physics here or something? Why are there 20 steps here when you're just adding 2 numbers? But it's that kind of experimentalism with not necessarily the goal of teaching the kids. I mean, the Common Core, what they'll tell you is what we're trying to do is help them have critical thinking skills. Okay, the kid is 6. He's not going to do advanced mathematic theory at 6. The kid's still kind of counting on their fingers. You need to kind of help them get the basics down. We can get to advanced number theory whenever they get into graduate school.
Okay, how do we turn it around?
Well,
How do we change things? I mean, if the
Well-
teachers have all been taught and professors.
But here's the thing. The model is already there. It has been used and it has worked. And I'm not just talking about, say, borrowing from the progressives and the idea of maybe, incrementalism, getting people who are more liberty-minded into the schools, encouraging your children that, sure, they share your same values and everything, and instead of encouraging them to go start a business of their own, saying, you have a knack with children. Have you ever thought about education? That's one way. But another way that it has been done, and it's a model that conservatives and libertarians have actually used, it's just kind of forgot about. In the late 1960s, there were many people who criticized both political parties because they said, what's the difference? There's like this, a very narrow sliver of light between Republicans and Democrats. And so there were conservatives in California who started doing things like this.
The name up front,
Things
please.
like
The name
this,
up front, please.
and on the individual level, talking to your friends, talking to your neighbors, talking to your coworkers, having conversations and discussions with them about issues like individual liberty, personal responsibility, free markets, and so forth, and talking about you and your relationship with the state, and how an expensive state that gets its fingers into everything basically politicizes everything. Because what is the state? The state is government. How do we affect government? How do we influence government? Through politics. Well, the state's in everything. Everything is politics. So if we want to depoliticize things, get the state out of things. Get the state back to the core. For example, when I talk about getting back to the core, I've actually read some conversations online with on some of the newspapers in New York City and people's responses to Mayor de Blasio and his plans for creating this commission and that commission and this committee and stuff. And these are blue-collar men and women who are saying, look, all we want from the city government is we want some clean streets. We want the streets not have potholes in them. We want to have a library nearby. We want schools that actually teach our kids something. Everything else, we don't need. We just need some schools, libraries, and roads, and some clean water coming out of the tap. Get rid of your involvement in everything else. But that model of dealing with people, working with people, and interacting with people on a very individual, personal, intimate basis like this, that actually carried people to the point where Ronald Reagan was elected to the presidency in 1980. It was that grassroots, individual effort that made it happen. But part of the problem that many people who are conservative or libertarian, liberty-minded people forget is that we look at something, we look at a problem and say, okay, this is a problem. Here's a solution. We've solved. We've set out to achieve this goal. We've achieved this goal. Well, I'm done. But you're dealing with individuals who don't think of things that way. The end goal is still the revolution. The issue is not the issue. The revolution is the issue. And anything that can be used as a vehicle to get from point A to point B is fine. And they're more than willing to take some losses here and there. Because if they can get a little victory here and a little victory there, then the progressives just build from victory to victory, comrades, for the bright, glorious, shining tomorrow. So for them, what we would see as, well, I'm done. We've achieved this goal. Done. Now on to living my life. On the other side of the equation is, well, that was a setback. Well, how do we overcome that setback? Well, we've got to regain our ground and pick up where we left off. See, that it's kind of two conflicting views. One is this ever-loving admiration for the state and constant glorification of the state and advancement of the state. Whereas, how many of you in this room want to spend your entire lives in almost every waking moment constantly battling, constantly fighting? What do you want to do? You want to go home, you want to kick off your shoes, watch some TV, and relax. For the love of Pete, you want to enjoy some of the fruits of your labor. You want to enjoy your life. You don't want to spend almost every waking moment in constant struggle, constant combat. You want to get some peace and quiet out of this brief blink of existence that we have.
Wouldn't, I strongly believe in the theory of the hand.
Say it loudly.
Oh, I strongly believe that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, and I would like to see money spent on education in the hands of parents, like as a tax refund, because the cost of education is intergenerational. But if the parents socialized the children and made all the decisions towards their education, that is what would change the society, instead of the collective public schools.
There's definitely an argument to be made for that. And some of the market-minded people like von Hayek, I mean, he would absolutely agree. He would say education is essential for having an informed, vibrant populace that is able to take care of themselves, make decisions, and interact with one another in a bit more harmonious way as individuals. And von Hayek would say, whatever means you need to do to follow to get to that point. If it's public school and you find a public school and you create a system that works and educates children so that they can be productive members of society, awesome. If your approach is to teach children at home and you still get the job done, fantastic. If it's a charter school, if it's a private school, if it's a community school, whatever gets the job done would be the thoughts of guys like von Hayek. The statists, on the other hand, they're looking at it and say, where's my power? You're teaching your children on your own. What does that do for me?
No, well, they wouldn't necessarily teach them themselves, but they'd get the money and decide how they would get taught, which
Yeah.
basically administration of education would be put in the hands of the parents instead
It
of
would
the
be
state.
personal. It would be individually tailored for your child. But you see,
Most parents would have to still send their children to a school of some
but you
sort.
see that there's an alternate mindset that you're working against there that does not actually see you, your children, anyone else as being a unique individual. Everybody is interchangeable. You are just as good as him, not on the basic human level that you're a human being born with certain rights as an individual human being. For the radical Marxists, everyone in here is basically interchangeable in the state. I'll give you a prime example. In the Soviet Union, whenever Stalin wanted to redirect a river, because he just wanted to redirect a river, he thought it'd be really nice. Weren't quite as many laborers as he thought he had who could do the project. So, I'm sorry, you're a physician. We need some guys to shovel some dirt. You'll do. You're now a dirt shoveler. And the same thing happened in communist China during the Great Leap Forward. They didn't have an industrial proletariat to lead the revolution. They were still a largely agrarian society. Classical Marxism, the power of the revolution was going to come from the industrial workers, the industrial proletariat. Well, if you don't have an industrial proletariat, your revolution kind of falls flat. So with the communists, they said, we're going to create an industrial proletariat. We'll create industry just out of whole cloth. We need to increase steel production. So you are going to build a smelter in your backyard, and you will smelt iron. So now you're a steel worker, even though you were born a farmer.
Jack of all trades.
It worked for China.
After they introduced market reforms.
Back on the subject of education, in 1974, when I was diagnosed with being what it later turned out to be Asperger's syndrome. This is on topic, I promise. My parents were told by social workers in the school district we lived at the time, it was 163 in Park Forest, Illinois, that I would basically be a brilliant mind. I won't go that far with brilliant mind, but I would be a bright mind in a useless body, and that the kind educated my father had a bachelor's degree, my mother later got one. Actually, she later got a master's degree. That the kind humane thing would be to put me in a state institution. Well, my parents fought and 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 fought. And finally, in 1981, I got sprung from the special education system. The damage was already done, but it happened. But in one of those totalitarian paradises, as I've told people, I said, this is one of the reasons why I'm conservative. The state would have said to my parents, this is what you're going to do, and the discussion would have been over. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know this or that, but I'm glad my parents fought for it because of the fact that, as I tell people, this ain't a garden. I was able to do things that the state, there are people that later came back and said, you know what, we were wrong about her. Well, my parents were like, we knew you were wrong about her, which is why we fought it. But for someone, once again, they talk about the individual. In some place like China or Cuba or wherever, they're like, this is what you're doing with her, discussion over, game over, put her in, you will hand her over to us by this time this afternoon, by this time tomorrow afternoon. And that's what really, when you talk to, even now, you talk to a liberal, you mention to someone, let's just say, you have Asperger's. Oh, I have Asperger's syndrome. Oh, so you have Asperger's syndrome. So what kind of state help are you getting? I said, what makes you think I'm getting any state? Well, you said you're autistic. Yeah, but if I want help, I'll ask for it. If I don't, just assume I don't need it. But you need help. No, I don't. If I needed it, I would ask for it. What I need you to do is leave me alone, okay? But in a situation, even in places like Britain now, They tell you, okay, this is what's gonna happen, shut up, just do it. And I noticed that creep is starting to happen again, where the state is saying, your child is, look at all these little boys are being diagnosed with ADHD for just basic boyish behavior. Typical, they're taking away recess, they're taking away everything else, and then they're saying, oh, your child, or even some of these cases of autism, I think are misdiagnosed. They're just misdiagnosing basic childhood, unruly childhood behavior. Kids are unruly sometimes, they're trying to be a kid, and putting them on all these drugs and everything else, so that they can become good little quiet drones of the state, and it really kind of frightens me.
Well, and part of that, of seeing something wrong with boys, being rambunctious and energetic, it comes from that philosophy and that belief that there's no difference. There's absolutely zero difference between boys, girls, people who are short, people who are tall, whatever, that you're all perfectly interchangeable.
Your number.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to touch on a point that you made earlier about looking at the statistics of the murders and the violence that occur as a result of putting in place some of the fascism, socialism. Looking at a society of individual freedom and liberty. If we were to actually just take exactly what the Constitution tells us that the government should be paying for or subsidizing. If we were to take it there, can you see a society where the violence would go down because of that? Or would we have the same things going on? So is there a shift that we need to rethink things of the results we're looking for?
The thing is that in a more constitutionally based society, issues such as crime prevention and managing crime would be left to more state-based level, more community-based level. Philosophies towards things such as incarceration would be more geared towards individual states, individual communities, rather than having all of these federal guidelines that are kind of a one-size-fits-all. And that's part of the problem of making everything a federal issue. We've heard that when we were kids, you're going to make a federal case out of it. The problem is, we make almost everything now a federal case. I have this problem, federal government, come help me. Instead of relying on the things that people used to rely on, that actually bound us together as human beings and as communities, and that is, look, our neighbor needs some help. He's a little short on the rent. Let's kind of do a little wit round and pony up some cash for him and help him out. Or he's down on his luck. He's lost his job. He hasn't had anything in 2 weeks. Let's get some food together. Let's help him out. Let's get the church involved. And that personal, individual connection that we used to have with one another as individual human beings actually giving a damn about one another gets replaced by people who have absolutely no concern about you, your life whatsoever, because you are just another piece of paper in their file in a bureau. That's it.
Yeah, I think people have a hard time facing the fact that there would be a replacement if we were to get rid of government bureaucracy in some of these agencies and stop trying to look to the federal government for these answers. It's like they can't believe that we would step up.
Yeah,
yes.
Federal government, or any government, is like an impersonal force. Without a personality. It's just almost like a droid or a drone.
And for a lot of issues, it's a 40-pound sledgehammer when all you need is a screwdriver.
Yes.
Right.
You're calling down, the great powers from above, the God state, the federal government, the supreme, federal deity, to handle something which is really just a very small, localized, personalized issue. It doesn't have the finesse. It doesn't have that fine tuning that your own community would have, or people in your own community would have, because they know what the needs are in this community. They know the people of this community. They know kind of the zeitgeist, the feel of the community. The federal government doesn't.
And it doesn't love.
Give a damn about your community, really.
It does not love. It cannot love.
No, because you are indeed reduced to a file. There was even a rejection of this overarching kind of bureaucratic state in France, of all places. There was in the 1970s, there was kind of this movement to reduce the bureaucracy and get things more into the hands of individual communities, or these posters, in fact. And I wish that we had a projector here or something I could show you. It's a really nice poster. Basically, it had this field of very, very simple little stick figure type drawings that just had a pair of glasses and a little nose and a face, and just about a field of them. And below it, translated from French into English, read, "No to the bureaucracy." Any questions?
I guess I'm thinking of the term that I'm hearing a lot in the news of. It's like income redistribution or income inequality. It sounds like some of this fascist theology was trying to solve this inequality.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the early days of the Soviet Union, actually in the lead up to the Bolshevik Revolution, one of the mottos they had was "Work, Bread, Peace," because what was Russia involved in at the time was involved in World War I. So they wanted, so that the workers wanted peace. Now, granted, what the workers' paradise created after the revolution made the First World War look like a cakewalk, but the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was saying, come, you're out of work, we will provide work. You're hungry, we will provide bread. You want peace, we will provide bread. We will provide peace. So that was the inducement, and that was the promise that was held out. We're going to build this utopia where everyone shares in all of the abundance of the state. Now, of course, some of us will be more equal than others, but we'll get to that after the revolution, comrades. Don't worry your pretty little head about us in our private homes off in the countryside while you starve standing in line at the state store, hoping to get a loaf of bread. And your work is whatever the state decides your work is going to be. We're the state. We've decided that you are going to be educated as a dock worker, but I have the hands of a surgeon, and I'm curious about biology. No, you're not. You are going to be a dock worker.
Drew your name out of the hat for the doctor.
Unless, of course, you are connected to a member of the Communist Party, and especially one in good standing, then we can kind of grease the skids for you and get you into the better schools, the ones that the average member of the Soviet society doesn't get to have.
So the revolution never ends then?
Well, no. The revolution is constant. It's always. Even during the years of the Soviet Union, what they told the people was, we all think, well, the Soviet Union was communist. Well, by their own name, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. By their own propaganda, they said we were building socialism. So in that whole time period that people thought of, communist Russia, in their mindsets, no, we're not there yet. Communism is that bright utopia towards which we're working. And we're all working together, comrades, and we're all sacrificing together. We all have skin in the game, comrades, to build this bright tomorrow that you won't get to enjoy. Maybe your grandchildren will, whenever we've established communism, or at least once we've perfected and established socialism, which by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union's own reckoning, they were supposed to have achieved socialism in 1980. Oh well.
That's the year they collapsed.
But no, the revolution is always. In Cuba, when you listen to the ramblings of that nut job with the cigar and the hat and everything, that used to go on for hours and hours and hours on state radio. What he would talk about is how the revolution continues, the class struggle continues, because there are always going to be those people who just resist this wonderful, wonderful thing that we're achieving here. There are going to be those dadgum malcontents who we haven't killed or imprisoned. So we always have to struggle. We have to struggle against those dark forces within people so that we can create the new socialist man.
And they never find rest.
No, because there's always something against which to struggle. There's always something against which to fight. It is basically a philosophy of constant struggle, constant revolution, constant battle.
As long as there is government, the necessary evil, then we have to keep the
You gotta have a bridge, comrade, to get from here to paradise.
Comrade.
Remember how they used to say, well, the reason it hasn't worked is because it hasn't been tried correctly yet. I remember as a teenager during the Cold War, when they were thinking, oh, the wall will never come down, and blah, blah, all the stuff that actually happened. The reason they come, and I lost family to the starvation in Ukraine. So my family was pretty much gone way before the Nazis entered my late grandfather's Ukrainian city. The communism is great. Socialism is great, you little weird conservative girl. The reason it hasn't worked is because it hasn't worked correctly. But all these countries have tried it, and it's all been brutal. No, they haven't done it correctly. So what's the correct way? They could never give me an answer to that because the problem was it had been tried correctly.
Well, here's the thing. In the early days of the Soviet Union, Lenin was going down through the orthodoxy, if you will, of Marxism, including the idea of absolutely zero private property. Now, you could have personal property. You could have a book on your nightstand. You could have a nightstand, but you didn't have actual ownership of real estate, land, or anything that would be a significant capital asset, because private ownership of capital is naughty, naughty, naughty. So, but in the early days of the Soviet Union, whenever they collectivized the farms, they were going to follow the pure Marxist doctrine of the collective ownership of the farms, and they just figured, well, everybody's going to work together, they will hold the farm in common, and there will be mass abundance for everyone in the farm. When the starvation hit, Lenin thought, okay, we've collectivized the farms, but the individual farmers, if you want to have a little plot that's kind of yours, and you want to grow a little for yourself, maybe some that you could use to barter and trade, here's the thing, that tiny little glimmer of a market reform within Soviet agricultural policy actually helped alleviate some of the shortages and starvation. Not a whole lot, because again, we're talking about small little plots, but still that incentive that this is yours to manage as you see fit and to manage for yourself and your own personal abundance. They actually had enough to kind of barter with others. They had more than enough to just feed themselves and meet their own personal basic needs. They had enough to say, well, Valery down the road has a bicycle. I'd love to have a bicycle, can't afford to buy one. But I have a few extra potatoes.
And that's free markets.
Evil market speculation.
Trade things freely.
Can't ride a bicycle if you don't have a potato to eat.
That's true.
What kind of a guy was FDR?
FDR? You want to get into the FDR administration that was packed full of people who thought that Stalin was a wonderful guy. And guys like Harry Hopkins, who thought that the Potemkin villages of the Soviet Union were real. Why, look, they took us to these villages where everybody's happy, everybody is living in abundance. Never mind that basically the abundance they have is all for show, because it was taken from these collective farmers over here to put into this village that we had you visit. We didn't let you visit the others, where the people are living in rags. We're going to show you those little inconvenient things. But Hopkins, he thought, this Stalin guy, he's got it. He's really understood the way to structure and orient society. And FDR himself was very much, he liked the idea of having a highly concentrated federal state that had an incredible amount of power that it could wield. Because remember, he worked in the Woodrow Wilson administration. And especially during the First World War, Wilson went from a guy who, before being president, thought, yes, Congress constitutionally is where the power of government is. Congress has the power of the purse. Congress drafts and creates laws. And that's where the proper source of governmental power should be among the branches. When he became president,
Come to the office, please, Deborah.
when he became president, he had an epiphany. Why, I'm president. This is where the real power of the federal government should be. I mean, I'm president, after all. I should be guiding the country and massaging the whole system. And
Judge Napolitano talked about that at his presentation.
Yeah, Wilson was one of those who definitely believed in that whole state guiding society philosophy, that if we just have the government with experts to guide all of society, we'll take care of all the problems because we have experts.
And who chooses those experts exactly is the key right there.
Do you have any input on how those experts are chosen? Do you have any input into how they actually do their job? And if they do a poor job, Are you able to give them a pink slip and send them packing?
No. There is no complaint against it.
See our new Ebolas are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the real dangers of an ever-growing bureaucracy, is that there is no answer to the people. The people don't really have any input into who's there. Sure, whenever administrations change, who's ever at the top of each individual agency changes, but the core, the people who are there year in, year out, agency to agency, quite frankly, the attitude within the bureaucracy, especially the federal bureaucracy, is that administrations come and go. It's like the passing of the tides. This administration comes and goes, that one comes and goes. We are the beach. We are here forever.
Just because it can't be fired, you should be able to fire it.
Well, the Constitution then, our U.S. Constitution, suffers with this kind of approach to government.
Because many of the progressives see the federal Constitution, especially as it stands, as an impediment. Because it separates governmental power into 3 individual branches, each serving as a check on one another. And what progressives have done over the years is, as they have managed to get into one branch of the bureaucracy, well, not bureaucracy, but we'll get to that. As they get into one branch of government, they then say, well, we've got this one. Now we need to move on to the next one. It's that whole philosophy of that constant revolution. We got this one, now let's move on to the next one, let's move on to the next one.
And the Constitution kind of, well,
The
it's supposed to
Constitution
keep
doesn't
them
give
from-
me power. Come on.
Words.
Constitution gives you power. Doesn't do anything for me. That's the mindset you're dealing
I think
with.
it's changing though. I think groups like this, other
Mhm.
groups across the country, you said they have
Well,
and they want to change it back.
Mhm.
I'm hoping so too.
If we don't, our children and grandchildren don't have a chance, do they?
And
One last comment.
sure.
they don't see what's.
I had never heard of the term progressive until just before the election of Barack Obama. And I do remember when Barack Obama was going against Hillary Clinton, Hillary Clinton made a statement that just perked my ears on national TV. I am a progressive of the 1920s.
And she is.
Which a progressive of the 1920s was an acolyte of Benito Mussolini and
So she was
other
very clear on
states.
that.
I mean,
She was
yeah.
very clear.
Which is hilarious, just to be proud of being a progressive in the 1920s, because progressives in the 1920s were definitely on board with the whole concept of the God state, the all-pervasive, all-powerful state.
Well, thank you so much for coming out. We're gonna give him a round of applause. And you're a curator at Texas Tech University,
Well, Wrenching Heritage Center, yeah.
the Ranch and Heritage Center.
Which
okay.
is part of Texas Tech.
Part of Texas Tech. Good. I think I didn't mention that earlier, so just in case anybody wants to drop by over there.
It's a great place.
If you've never been to the Ranch and Heritage Center.
Thank you very much.
And even if you have, you should go several times. So thank you very much. Maybe we'll have you back at some point too.
Good job.
Thank you all for coming. Everybody, if you had somebody that wanted to come to this event, you can encourage them to go to LubbockLiberty.com, and there will be a video posted on that website. And then next month, on the 22nd, I believe, that's a Saturday, 4th Saturday of November, right before the week of Thanksgiving, we will have another workshop where we'll have a member of, I think he's actually the vice president of the Young Americans for Liberty chapter up at the Texas Tech University. So he's going to come talk about the NSA surveillance state and what that means to our personal individual liberty and privacy. So we welcome everybody to come to that. That's going to be at the Groves Library, and it'll be from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. So I'd love for y'all to join us there too. Thank you all for coming again.
Thank you.